It's very easy for us. We live in a very small place. It's very tenuously constructed. It's tenuously constructed and bounded by all of our fears about this world. So we have this boundary of fear, and within it, we roam the annals of what we call ourselves, wearing a very thick path, a very thick trail, a groove so deep that often we can't walk outside of it. We can't even see outside of it in a lot of cases, yeah? All of our expectations, all of our ideas, and this affects our actions. We begin to continue to act in the same way over and over again, in the hopes that it will result in some different outcome. But of course, we're limited. We're limited by the self that we cling to and by our gaining idea, our goal of what we should achieve. There's a story about this in the Sanshekishu. It's the fourth case. It's called Obedience, and it features Master Bankei. I'm going to read it to you. The Master Bankei's talks were attended not only by Zen students, but by persons of all ranks and sects. He never quoted sutras, nor engaged in scholastic dissertations. Instead, his words were spoken directly from his hearts to the hearts of his listeners. His large audiences angered a priest of the Nichiren sect because the adherents had left to hear about Zen. The self-centered Nichiren priest came to the temple and determined a debate with Bankei. "Hey, Zen teacher," he called out. "Wait a minute. Whoever respects you will obey what you say. But a man like myself doesn't respect you. Can you make me obey you? Come up beside me and I'll show you," said Bankei. Proudly, the priest pushed his way through the crowd to the teacher. Bankei smiled. "I'm sorry, could you come over to my left side?" The priest obeyed. No, Bankei, I'm sorry. It'd be better if we were on my right side. Step over here." The priest proudly stepped to the right. "You see," observed Bankei, "you're obeying me, and I think you're a very gentle person. Now sit down and listen." Bankei's story on its surface looks like it's pretty shallow. We think we understand the concept right away. But we need to sit deeply with this. There's a much more profound teaching here on karma and obedience. Not in the sense of submission to some authority, but as an insight into the nature of ego, into our expectations, into what pride is, and into the heart of our practice. This is a simple encounter, right? But Bankei reveals the subtle ways in which our conditioned mind operates and how we can move beyond it. At first glance, the story really seems like Bankei has outwitted this other priest. Yeah? The Nichiren priest was driven clearly by his ego, by some objective of proving his correctness or rightness, and he comes ready to debate, imagining that he's going to change the circumstances through his skillful speech. How often does that work, folks? Yeah? Yet through a few very simple requests, Bankei gently exposes the hidden compliance that's possible when we recognize our hopeless interconnectedness. Yeah? Rather than approaching this head-on, ego to ego, bullhorns to bullhorns, right? Bankei's instructions to move right and left have him dancing the dance of obedience that he sought to deny. It's about a willingness to move beyond the constraints of our expectations, to move beyond the constraints of the rules in which we think things work, or by the encounter of self and other. We always think other has certain motivations, and self has very different motivations. But everybody who constructs a self constructs it out of the very same material. Yeah? And so in those ways, they're remarkably similar. And beyond that, they're very interconnected. The thing that you seek to oppose is actually a part of you. So Bankei wasn't trying to prove his superiority. The other priest came and was trying to prove that he couldn't be moved. I won't follow. I won't comply. I'm above this. But in truth, this ego is a very fragile thing. And through avoiding confrontation, by not arguing, quoting sutras, talking about past hurts or harms, things that have happened in the past that crystallized our notion of the other person's goodness or badness, was able to actually work with what was right in front of them very skillfully. This is an obedience, but it's not an obedience to our expectations, or it's not an obedience to our judgments. It's an obedience to what's at hand. It's obedience to reality. When we align ourselves with the way things are, rather than clinging to how we want them to be, right? That means we can respond to the present moment without resistance or attachment, without a fixed idea of how things should go. This heart-to-heart teaching, bypassing intellectual debate, is how we can actually show up on the moment and manifest fully as compassion. When we see past our judgments of self and other and good and bad, that we can intrinsically work with the true nature that's present in each one of us. And we can disarm all the barriers of ego, all of the latches and barbs that keep us bound. It's about surrendering to what is, as it is, and recognizing that our notions of superiority, separation, control are all illusions. But once you move past all of those in your head, then that consistency, that suchness will manifest itself in your life. How often do you resist reality in your life? How often do we read from the same script over and over again, hoping that the play will end a little bit differently? And the dance in our lives may not seem as simple as this one. On the surface, simply asking, taking a step to the left or taking a step to the right, or moving past expectations of what the encounter with our lives should be like. And yet, if you take away all of your crystallized notions of how this circumstance should present itself, all of our lived challenges show with the simplicity of this case. Yeah? Einstein once said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And yet, that's what we do when we're bound by the ego, when we're bound by our expectations, which don't vary, even though each moment is crisp and fresh and new. If you just release your grip on those things, on those expectations, on those judgments, on those ideas of who you think you are, on who you think they are, then the situation presents itself completely anew, and you always know how to do this subtle dance that Bankei is doing right for now for us. This is more than a clever, teachable moment. It's an invitation to each of us. Can you notice the ways you resist? Can you notice the ways that you judge and how you cling to those judgments? Can you see how they karmically affect your life and your lived experience? Can you see the deeply repeating patterns over and over again? We all have these karmic satellites in orbit, and they move past at predictable intervals because the gravity that holds the self together is always the same. It's built of the same expectations on the same premises. But when you release those, then things are free to go where they belong, and the universe is set to right. Flow of life begins to carry us gently and with great care. And things fall into place in a way that they never would if we tried to force our expectations on them, our sense of self, our ego. Don't think that the ego is somewhere within you, right? When you have an ego and you present it that way, it's reflected in everything out there karmically. If you approach your lived circumstances with belligerence and a refusal to accept them as they are, then you're going to be met with belligerence. and a refusal to accept things as they are. That's simply the rule. It's how it works. So notice today where you're resistant, where you're pushing back against what's presenting itself. When does your pride step in? When does your ego manifest? Instead of reacting, just take this normal step to the left or to the right. Yeah? Challenge the bull. Learn to master it. Learn to steer it. And you'll find that obedience to reality isn't a loss, it's true freedom. That's the wonderful freedom that's actually presented to us in this case. You think, if I let go of my expectations, then my life will just go crazy and things will be horrible. If you let go of your expectations, if you put your ego down just for a moment, then you'll see the boundless essence of who you really are, and everything will be set to right. Yeah? And you can join the dance of life, twirling freely, uninhibited, and appreciating where you stand. Not appreciating or hoping for that someday you'll be where you want to be, but just appreciating and loving the place where you are right now.